Speaker.
Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. John Key, retiring Prime Minister, never put children and families first. At every opportunity, John Key refused to put the needs of families and children ahead of the interests of the wealthy few. And so this is actually the legacy of John Key. I'm surprised by Bill English's response tonight on this debate, because there are thousands and thousands of New Zealand families who know that they are now doing worse than ever under the leadership of John Key and the National Party. 8 years John Key has had an opportunity to turn life around for the families who need him the most, and at every point he has refused to help them. Let's not forget, the first thing he did when he became Prime Minister was to give tax cuts to the rich. That was his first decision, was to give tax cuts to the very richest families in this country, leaving working families who were subject to the harms caused by the global financial crisis, just left them right out of the picture. It was the rich who did the best out of John Key when he first took the Prime Ministership, and it is still the rich who are doing the best from John Key 8 years later. The families and children of hard-working New Zealanders were left out by John Key and left out by this national government. New Zealand, the only way we can put families and children at the heart of government decisions is to change the government in 2017. Because even though John Key has gone and his leadership is now over, the national government, the National Party, continues with that evil program that denies the rights of families and children to a decent life in this country. It has been shameful watching John Key make decisions that leaves families and kids out in the cold. John Key was heard saying this morning that New Zealand is largely the envy of the world, he said, the envy of the developed world in terms of job creation and wage growth. No, it's not. No, it's not for the New Zealanders who live here, who are struggling to pay their rent and put food on the table and pay their power bills. This is the reality for thousands of New Zealand children. It is not, they are not envious. This is a shameful legacy that John Key leaves us. There are so many good things that could have happened under John Key's leadership that he ignored, because New Zealand families and their children were never at the core of his decision-making. So I would like to deal with the issue of children going hungry at school. It was scandalous, and is still scandalous, that thousands of New Zealand children are still going to school hungry and are at school hungry because we do not have a comprehensive school food program in our schools. And when I asked John Key about that today in question time, his excuse was that there is a program and there's been a bit of government support for it. There are still hungry children at school. So what about them? So some are getting fed, and what about the ones who are not? What about the ones who are not getting fed and are still hungry? Do they count for John Key? Do they matter to John Key? Or is he happy that only some kids are getting fed in this country and some are still hungry? Because that is what is happening for thousands of New Zealand children. They are still hungry at school because John Key and National would not support a comprehensive food in schools program. They had the choice, they had the money to commit to that, but there are still thousands of children who are left out. These are the choices of this Prime Minister. That is his legacy. What about the children who are still being admitted to New Zealand hospitals because of the illnesses that they suffer from cold, damp, mouldy houses? The 40,000 hospitalisations of New Zealand children because John Key and the national government refused to put in place a warrant of fitness to warm up, to dry up these homes for these kids. What about the 15 children who die every year under John Key's leadership because they live in cold, damp, mouldy houses? Houses that John Key and his government could have fixed. Houses that could be safe for those kids and their families to live in. Did those kids matter to John Key and to the national government? No, they did not. Nothing has changed that will protect those families and those 15 children. This is the legacy of John Key, retiring Prime Minister. Despite all of the rhetoric and all of the lovely stories we're going to hear about John Key from lots of different places, this is the actual impact of John Key being Prime Minister for 8 years and the national government being government for these 8 years. This is why we have to change the government. We cannot allow National to continue with the reins of power and with the financial resources and have them divert those resources and to use that power for the wealthy few when our families and our kids are suffering every day. What about the 40,000 New Zealanders who are homeless? What about them today? What about the families and the children who tonight will be sleeping in their car? Where do they fit in John Key's legacy? Because that's who he is leaving behind when he finishes. Those families are being left behind by John Key. Now, he talked a lot earlier today about housing policy. There are still thousands of New Zealand families who are homeless, who are sleeping in garages, who are sleeping in their cars, who are sleeping in motor camps, in caravans that are in appalling condition, cockroaches, damp and mould. Those families matter. Those kids in those families, they matter. They are important citizens of this country too, and they deserved better from John Key, because what did he spend his time on? Giving Sky City Casino the opportunity to put in place more gambling machines so they could make more money. That is what John Key spent his time on. Defending the dirty Saudi sheep deal. That is what John Key spent his time on. The tax cuts for the very wealthy is what he spent his time on. Keeping foreign trusts going in New Zealand is what John Key spent his time on, to enable the very wealthy to hide their money. Those things were his priority. One only needs to look back over the last 8 years and see for ourselves the legacy that John Key leaves. So it is time now, New Zealand, that we take back the reins of government and put in place a government that will put families and children at the heart of the decisions that we make. Because if we're not here to fight for and work for them, what is the point of you? I'm glad John Key is going. Good, he should go. He has not been a good Prime Minister. He has left these families to fend for themselves. He has had the resources and the opportunity to make a real difference, and he chose not to. Good, go. And take the rest of them with you. Because this is not a government who puts New Zealanders at the heart of their decisions, sir. In 2017, the Greens will be part of a new government who will put children and their families at the heart of every decision we make. That is what we will do. That is why we are saying, New Zealanders, we have to change the government. Losing John Key is not enough. They all have to go. We've got 6 months, 8 months, let's make it happen. Because those kids need us. They certainly don't need National. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker.